The first sound that returns to me is not a voice. It is the bright clink of a knife striking porcelain, a small bell of metal that rings and rings until it fills the whole room. I remember the way the table vibrated with it, the way the candle flame trembled as if the air itself had flinched. After that came the other sounds that always show up when a family tries very hard to look whole. Glass against glass. A laugh that does not come from a belly. A throat clearing to patch a silence. The scrape of a chair leg like chalk dragged across stone. I can set the scene for you the way a camera would. Warm overhead lights with that soft gold everyone likes for dinner because it makes faces look kinder than they feel. The long oak table I helped refinish when they moved in. Plates, white with a thin blue ring near the edge. A bowl of roasted carrots lacquered in honey. The sharp herb smell of rosemary on the lamb my daughter pricked with garlic slivers just as her mother used to. Steam coiling up from the pot of creamy potatoes. A bottle of wine breathing on the sideboard, a bottle I had bought and saved the day she told me she was pregnant with her first child. I had arrived early as I always did. Old habits do not break on their own. You need a hammer for them, and even then they hold. I like to help. I like to be useful. I set the utensils. I folded napkins the way my wife folded them when life was still a house with the doors open. I checked the oven when my daughter asked, lifted the foil for a peek, announced that the edges were crisping just right. I told her the food smelled perfect. I meant every word. You can call me sentimental. I am a man who saves tokens. Movie tickets. Receipts for coffees we drank together when she was in college, and I had just enough for her latte and maybe a half cup of black coffee for me. I saved a ribbon from her wedding bouquet, pressed flat in a book of psalms I read in the mornings. I saved the first tiny sock my grandson wore home, cotton soft as breath. None of those small reliquaries saved me from what was coming, but I keep them anyway. They teach me which moments mattered, and every one of them led to that table. Patrick was already on his second glass when I walked in. He likes to believe good wine is proof he has become a man of means. Is not the wine that gives him away, is the way he holds a glass as if the stem were a microphone, and the world has been waiting for his monologue. He is careful about his hair, and careless with his mouth. When he smiles, it does not always reach his eyes. I noticed that the very first time I shook his hand. You might ask why I helped them when I saw these things. Because I am a father, and because my daughter loved him, and because love is a lens that softens the corners of the room. When they were struggling, I stepped in. Tuition when her scholarship fell short. The last invoice for the wedding caterer when an unexpected expense cut into their savings. And the house. The big one. The down payment that pushed the loan over the line, the lifeline without which their offer would have vanished into the pile of other offers. I did not do any of it to own her or to win. I did it to push them forward, the way a current carries a boat through a narrow pass. The children ran circles through the hall, a thudding patter that made the frames on the wall rattle. I love that sound. It is the opposite of sorrow. When they came to the table, I cut their meat small and cooled it like I once did for my girl. She flashed me that lopsided smile she used to give me when she was 4 and wanted me to know I was still her hero. It hung on her face for only a second this time. Then she smoothed it away and looked toward him, as if seeking an invisible permission that should never be required between a daughter and her father. When we began to eat, Patrick leaned back and started talking about the house. Not the way a man talks about a home. The way a man talks about an asset. He quoted numbers the way a poker player recites the cards he believes he deserves. He talked about appreciation and equity and what he had done to raise the value. He spoke of the deck he had built, the landscaping he hired, the idea of a hot tub that he introduced as though it were a child he had chosen to bless with life. I listened. I am good at listening. My job once required it, and old professions leave their muscle memory behind. He bragged about a bonus he expected soon. He joked that the market rose every time he posted a photo of a house on social media. He laughed at his own joke. My daughter laughed too, a small laugh, one that sounded like she was trying on shoes that do not fit. You should know I had no plan to bring up the past. I was not there to count what I had given. I have never been that kind of man. I was there to break bread in the place where my grandchildren fall asleep on my chest after cartoons and warm milk. I was there because family is an address my heart still recognizes even when the street signs change. When the plates were nearly empty and the wine another inch lower, Patrick rested his arm across the chair back and stared at me with a smile that felt more like a dare. He said my name the way boys say the names of teachers they want to annoy. Then he raised his glass a little, like a toast without the kindness, and told me it was time for me to start looking for a place of my own. He did not say it as a suggestion. He said it like a command delivered to a subordinate. For a moment, I truly believed he was kidding. I waited for the grin to slip, for the laugh to come, for the punch line that washes the sting away. I smiled back and asked him what he meant. He said it again, clearer, slow enough that the syllables fell onto the table one by one and lay there like stones. It is our house now. We want our privacy. You have been here long enough. It is time to get your own space. The air left the room as if a window had been opened in winter. It did not matter that the house smelled like rosemary and butter and warm bread. It smelled then like iron, like blood in the mouth when you have bitten your tongue. The clock on the wall ticked louder than any clock I have ever heard in my life. I looked to my daughter. I did not need her to fight him. I did not want a scene. I only wanted one small thing, a handful of words thrown like a rope in my direction. That is not fair. He is our family. He is welcome here. But her eyes slid down toward her plate as if she were reading a recipe stamped on the porcelain. She tucked a stray hair behind her ear and lifted her glass, and did not drink. Patrick watched me watch her. It pleased him. He let the moment stretch. Then he said that he would help me look for a studio apartment. He described a place near the river that might be quiet enough for a man my age. He asked me if I needed help packing, then chuckled as if he had said something clever. There are many kinds of pain. There is the pain of a broken bone. There is the pain of a bad knee you forget until you stand. There is the pain that lives in your chest when a doctor looks down at a chart and says the name of a disease while your wife squeezes your hand and pretends everything will be fine. And then there is the pain that makes no sound and leaves no bruise, the kind you can only feel because it pulls a line across your life and tells you there is now a before and an after. I did not yell. Anger is cheap. I did not throw my napkin or slam a door. Noise would have given him what he wanted, a scene where he could play the righteous man. No, I chose a slower music. I placed my fork on the plate. I dabbed my mouth with the napkin and set it beside the fork. I thanked my daughter for dinner, and I meant it because the flavors were exactly right and because she had tried to make a night that would feel like home. Then I rose. I remember the texture of the chair as it slid backward over the rug. The small friction, the protest of wood on weave. I remember the cool draft that slipped in from a hallway and lifted the hair on my arms. I remember the voices of my grandchildren from the living room, where a cartoon rolled on with bright voices that never stop believing love can fix anything. I remember every detail because the body records evidence when the heart is under oath. In the guest room, the air smelled faintly of the cedar blocks I keep in the closet to keep the moths honest. My suitcase sat where it always sits, on the top shelf where I can reach it without a stool. I took it down and laid it open on the bed. The zipper teeth glittered like a seam of small silver moons. I began to pack. Shirts first. Folded the way my wife taught me, not the way I do when I am in a hurry. I smoothed each one with my palm, pressing out wrinkles the way you press a worry bead between fingers. I placed my shaving kit on top. I chose 2 pairs of pants, practical colors, the colors of errands and bus rides and waiting rooms. A book. The photographs I keep on the dresser. My wedding ring in the little dish my granddaughter made me from clay that was supposed to be blue but came out the color of a summer sky after rain. As I packed, I thought of the first time my daughter slept in a room with walls that I did not pay for. How proud she had been. How I measured my success by her comfort. You build a life, and then you pour out like water into another life. You do not ask for the water back. That is not how fatherhood works. But you do hope the cup remembers the river. When the suitcase was closed, I sat on the bed and looked around the room. It was a gentle room. The kind people prepare for the person they believe will never stop being their refuge. A soft chair near the window where morning collects. A quilt my wife pieced the winter she was too tired to leave the house for long. A small table with a lamp that warms the space the way a hand warms a shoulder. I thanked the room for holding me. I stood. I lifted the handle. The rollers hummed as they moved. Back at the table, nothing had moved except time. Patrick had switched to water, as if that could turn him into a sober man. My daughter had placed her hands in her lap, where I could not see them. When I entered, their faces turned toward me in a single motion, two planets caught briefly in the same orbit. I did not ask permission to speak. I spoke the way you speak when your voice must carry the weight of a bridge across a ravine. I told them I would be gone that night. I told them I would not impose on their privacy. I told them that I would not need help finding a place. I did not tell them that the money for the down payment had come from selling the last piece of jewelry my wife owned that had real value. I did not tell them that I had given up the surgery that would have made my knee less troublesome, so they could begin their married life where they wanted to. I did not tell them any of it because I do not believe in using gifts as weapons. My daughter looked up. For a breath, I saw the child who once stood at the edge of the diving board and searched my face to see if she was brave enough. Her mouth opened. I waited. Patrick put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed as if she were an instrument he knew how to play. She closed her mouth and looked down again. That is the moment the floor in me gave way. It did not make a sound. It did not need to. I took the bottle of wine from the sideboard, the one I had saved, and set it on the table beside my plate. I told them to keep it. I did not want to carry a symbol whose meaning had changed. I kissed my grandchildren on their heads. I told them I would see them soon. I told them to be kind to their mother. At the door I paused. I could feel Patrick behind me, waiting for one last exchange, hungry for the small victory of seeing me try to take back what could not be taken. I turned only to address my daughter. I told her I loved her. I told her that love is a house that can survive storms, but that it must not invite the storm to live inside. She began to cry without sound. I knew those tears. They were the tears you cry when you have promised yourself that silence is safety, and safety turns out to be a trap with a painted smile. I stepped onto the porch. The night air was cooler than it had any right to be after a warm day. Somewhere in the neighborhood a dog barked and then apologized with quiet. The sky above the maple trees held a few dull stars like old coins. I rolled the suitcase down the front steps and along the path I had edged with bricks 2 summers ago. My car blinked awake when I pressed the key. Before I opened the door, I looked back once. The dining room window framed the table like a painting. Candles guttered. Plates sat half full. A family tableau tilted just enough to make you uneasy. I knew then what I had not allowed myself to know until that exact second. I was not leaving a home. I was leaving a place where my respect had been downgraded to a convenience. I slid behind the wheel and sat with my hands on the leather that has molded to my grip over the years. I listened to my own breathing. I waited for the ache to make me foolish. It did not. The ache settled into something else, something steady. Not rage. Not yet. Something like a tide pulling back from the shoreline, gathering itself for a return that would redraw the sand. I backed out of the driveway I had paid to widen so their 2 cars could sit without scraping. I drove slowly past the mailbox I had repaired after a storm had leaned it sideways. I reached the corner and stopped at the sign I once painted when the city trucks took too long to come. In the rearview mirror the house sat like a stage after the applause has ended. The porch light glowed. The door was closed. I turned left. The road carried me into a night that held its breath. The radio stayed off. My phone lay face down on the passenger seat. Streetlights washed the hood in pools of pale gold. I felt the first thin strand of a thought begin to weave itself. It was not yet a plan. It was not even a decision. It was only this. When a man has given everything he can give, and is then told to get out like an intruder, He must decide whether his silence is a pillow to smother him or a field where something new can grow. I did not cry. I did not curse. I did not pray for anything to be different. I drove to the small apartment I had rented months before when I thought it wise to give them space after my daughter asked for a little more privacy. I parked. I carried the suitcase up the stairs. The hallway smelled faintly of paint and dust. The lock clicked and the door opened, and I stepped into a room where nothing remembered me and nothing was expected of me. In the quiet, I unpacked and placed my clothes in the small dresser. I set my wedding ring dish on the windowsill. I leaned the photo of my wife against the lamp base. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the curtain that lifted with each soft breath of the night wind. Then the phone vibrated. I looked at the screen and saw a name that was not my daughter. I put it face down again. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it dragged me under like a slow river. I dreamed of a house with open doors and voices that spoke in kindness. I woke before dawn and stood at the window to watch the first thin light sharpen the edges of the world. There are mornings when you understand that a line has been drawn and you have crossed it even if your feet never left the floor. This was one of those mornings. I made coffee in a small metal pot. I drank it black the way I did when there was no money for cream. Steam rose. The bitter smell filled the room. I sat on the chair by the window and pressed the warm mug against my palms and let the heat seep into old bones. I wanted to be the man who stayed hurt. There's a small comfort in that identity. It is simple. It requires only a repetition of the same sad sentence. But the part of me that has lived through worse shook his head and told me no. You might think the story ends here with a man who accepts a lesser role in his own life. It does not. But the first chapter must end with the moment that makes everything else unavoidable. At noon that day, my daughter texted 3 words. We need space. No apology. No visit. No what can we do to fix this. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I typed I love you. I erased it. I typed I will always be here. I erased it. I typed nothing and put the phone away. That night the phone lit the room again. This time it was a message from Patrick. 5 words and a period shaped like a push in the middle of my chest. Do not come back again. I did not reply. I did something quieter. I stood and crossed the room to the narrow closet where I had stored a box of folders that I keep the way some men keep fishing rods or guitar cases. The cardboard rasped as I pulled it down. I set it on the table and opened it and leafed through the labels until I found what I was looking for. Paper that carries the weight of roofs and walls. Ink that says who belongs where. Dates that tell the truth, even when people forget how. I laid the documents flat and pressed the edges until everything aligned. Then I turned off the lamp and went to bed with the knowledge that a season had ended and another had already begun, whether anyone knew it or not. This is where the night closes on the first act. I left quietly. I carried only my clothes, a few photographs, and the part of my heart that had not agreed to be discarded. The rest I left at the table with the candles guttering in their brass cups and the taste of rosemary on the plates. I did not yet know how silence could become louder than any speech. I only knew that the silence I chose was not the same as the silence that had been demanded of me. One is a cage. The other is the hallway outside the cage where the exit sign glows like a promise. The first night after leaving their house was not a night at all. It was a long, stretched-out ache divided into hours that refused to move. The clock on the wall ticked like a metronome set to punishment. The streetlights outside threw pale bands across the floor of my apartment, a place so small that even the silence felt crowded. I lay awake on the mattress, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of my phone. Every vibration made my pulse jump. Every second of quiet made it sink again. I kept telling myself, she'll call. She'll explain. She'll say she didn't mean to stay silent. That she froze. That she was afraid of making things worse. Anything. Any words would do. But the night stretched its wings and flew past me without mercy. By dawn, I gave up on sleep. I boiled water in a dented pot I'd brought with me from the old house. The The smell of instant coffee filled the kitchen, bitter and thin. The cup was chipped, the color of old teeth. I sat by the window, watching the light turn the world from silver to gold, and felt like I was watching someone else's morning. Outside, a couple walked a small dog wrapped in a sweater. A delivery truck groaned past, its back doors rattling. The world was perfectly normal, which made the abnormality inside me harder to bear. I sipped my coffee and replayed the dinner again, and again the sound of his voice, her silence, my own footsteps leaving. Each replay added a new detail I hadn't noticed before. The way she had pressed her napkin flat, almost compulsively. The tremor in her fingers when he spoke. The small bruise on her wrist I had ignored, thinking it was from carrying boxes or cleaning. Memory, when it comes back in pieces, is not a mercy. Is a scalpel. By the third day, I began to realize silence corrupts faster than anger. It seeps into every part of you until you start doubting your own senses. Was it really that bad? Did I overreact? Maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe she wanted to defend me, but didn't know how. But then the memory of her eyes, fixed on her plate, came back with full color, and all those maybes collapsed like a tower of cards in the wind. I spent the next week trying to fill time. I cleaned the apartment even though it was already clean. I fixed a loose doorknob. I organized my clothes by color, then by use, then back by color again. I started walking to the park in the evenings, sitting on a bench near the duck pond. It was the same every night, parents pushing strollers, teenagers laughing too loudly, an old couple feeding crumbs to pigeons. Sometimes I envied the pigeons. They never question where home is. There's a strange comfort in being invisible. Nobody in that park knew who I was. Nobody expected me to smile or pretend. I was just another shadow among the others. I liked that. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to hold anyone else's world together. Still, the nights were long. I'd stare at the phone glowing on the table, its blue light cutting through the dark. Every sound, every creak in the building, every distant siren made me believe it was a message. But it never was. On the 10th day, I stopped keeping the phone by my bed. I put it in the drawer and told myself I didn't care. I lied. That afternoon, while searching for an old photograph, I found the folder that would change everything. It was thick, filled with crisp, official pages. The property documents, the house papers, the ones with my signature beside theirs. When I opened the folder, the smell of paper and ink hit me, the smell of bureaucracy, of formality, of something that doesn't bend to feelings. And there it was, my name, printed in black ink, on the line that said owner of record. 3 years ago, when they had come to me desperate for help, Patrick's credit was a disaster. He had been denied twice already. The only way they could get the house was if I co-signed the mortgage and paid the down payment directly. At the time, it didn't seem like a risk. I trusted them. I trusted her. The papers were clear the ownership would remain in my name until the loan was fully repaid. They had repaid almost nothing. I sat there for a long time, the documents spread across the table like an unexpected map of justice. I ran my finger over the date, over the ink, over the word irrevocable. And for the first time since that dinner, I felt my breathing steady. I wasn't powerless. I had just been patient. But the realization didn't come with triumph. It came with sadness, a deep, slow sadness that felt like mourning, because I knew what it meant. It meant they had built their pride on something that was never theirs. It meant every boast, every smirk, every cruel word that came from his mouth that night had been spoken from a chair I still owned. It meant I had given them everything, and they had mistaken my generosity for weakness. That night, I opened a notebook and began writing. Not plans, not revenge, just clarity. I wrote, silence is not surrender, is observation, is where truth learns how to walk. I kept writing, filling the page with fragments, memories of moments I had overlooked, lines from conversations, promises that now felt hollow. By the time I closed the notebook, the clock had struck midnight. The apartment was completely still except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat in that stillness until I realized something strange. I was no longer waiting for her call. The next morning, I decided to visit the neighborhood where the house stood. I told myself it was just curiosity, but part of me needed to see it again to look at it with new eyes, eyes that understood the truth. It was a warm afternoon. The sky was pale blue, the kind of blue that looks honest but hides the heat underneath. I parked a few houses down and just watched. The lawn was freshly mowed. The children's bikes were scattered on the driveway. The curtains in the living room were drawn halfway. From the open kitchen window came the faint sound of music, a song my daughter used to play while cooking with her mother. It hit me like a brick to the chest. For a moment, I wanted to walk up and knock on the door, to pretend everything could go back. But then I saw Patrick step out onto the porch with a phone pressed to his ear, laughing. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. He belonged there, or at least he thought he did. He didn't notice me sitting in the car. But I noticed the new car in the driveway, sleek, expensive, definitely beyond their means. And suddenly, I understood where the missed payments went. I started the engine and drove away. No confrontation. No words. Just quiet calculation. That night, I took the documents to the kitchen table and studied every clause. My lawyer's words from years ago echoed in my head. You'll still be the majority holder until the debt is cleared. I had forgotten that. Or maybe I had chosen to forget because I never wanted to imagine a day when I'd need that protection against my own family. But here I was. By the third week, the grief had turned into something else, not anger, but precision. The kind of precision a craftsman uses when restoring something that was taken apart. I began to move differently. I walked slower but thought faster. I listened more than I spoke. Silence stopped being my enemy. It became my weapon. I started keeping a journal of every detail, dates, payments, messages, memories. I didn't plan to use it yet, but I needed the discipline. Because discipline was the only bridge between emotion and justice. I called my old friend Clark, a lawyer, who had handled my wife's estate years ago. Clark, I said, I need to ask you about property law. He sighed. Something wrong? I hesitated. Not yet, but it might be. We met at his office 2 days later. It smelled of old books and lemon polish. He poured me coffee, the kind that tastes like it's been there since the morning. He read through the documents carefully, his finger tracing every clause. Then he looked up at me. You're still the legal owner, he said. Fully, until they pay the balance. I nodded, saying nothing. He watched me closely. What are you going to do? I smiled faintly. Nothing yet. He leaned back. You always were the patient type. Patience, I said, isn't the same as waiting. When I left his office, I walked past a window that reflected me in the afternoon light. For the first time in weeks, the man staring back didn't look defeated. He looked measured, focused, alive. That night, I wrote another line in my notebook. They thought silence meant absence. They forgot it also means preparation. I slept better than I had in a long time. But dreams have their own agenda. That night, I dreamt of my wife. She stood by the window, wearing her favorite blue sweater, the one she'd mended so many times it had become a patchwork of patience. She didn't speak, but she smiled a small, knowing smile that said, you already know what to do. When I woke, the room was filled with the kind of early light that makes everything look forgiven. I sat up, whispered her name, and thanked her. The next morning, I went for a walk along the lake. The surface of the water was calm, barely rippling under the breeze. I stopped and watched the sunlight scatter across it. Somewhere between the reflections, I felt something shift inside me, like an invisible thread tightening, pulling all the loose ends of my life into a single point of focus. I wasn't going to fight them in anger. That would make me like him. I was going to do it quietly, carefully, the way time punishes arrogance, not with a shout, but with proof. When I returned home, I opened the folder again. I noticed a section I hadn't paid attention to before, an automatic reversion clause. If payments were missed beyond a certain period, full ownership would revert back to me. They had missed that period 3 months ago. I felt a strange calm wash over me, like a man standing in the middle of a storm who suddenly realizes he's not getting wet anymore. I closed the folder, tied it with a string, and placed it on the corner of my desk. I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. But for the first time since that night, I could breathe. And when you've spent your life giving, breathing without permission feels like revenge enough. As the day faded, I stood at the window watching the streetlights flicker, on one by one. Each light looked like a heartbeat in the distance, slow, steady, deliberate. That's how I felt now. Deliberate. They thought they had ended the story when they told me to leave. But what they didn't know is that some stories begin only after you walk out the door. Morning arrived quietly, as if the world had been instructed not to disturb me. The light that spilled through the blinds felt different that day, not forgiving, not cruel, just honest. It illuminated the dust floating in the air like small, suspended truths waiting to be noticed. I sat at the table with my coffee, the same chip cup in my hands. The documents lay in front of me, spread out like an unfinished confession. I had looked at them a dozen times by now, memorized every line, every signature, every clause. But that morning, they didn't just feel like paper. They felt like keys to a door I didn't realize I had been locked behind. I didn't touch my phone. It had become an artifact of another life, one that belonged to a man still waiting for calls that would never come. Outside, I could hear the city waking, car doors slamming, birds arguing in the trees, the distant hiss of traffic. It all sounded like movement, and I realized I was tired of stillness. It had been 3 weeks since that dinner. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of trying to convince myself that forgiveness would be the higher road. But forgiveness is not the same as allowing yourself to be walked over. Forgiveness without boundaries becomes consent. That morning, I stopped consenting. I dressed with unusual care-pressed shirt, polished shoes, even the wristwatch my wife had given me for our 20th anniversary. I caught my reflection in the mirror as I buttoned my collar. For a moment, I didn't see the old man who left the dinner table in humiliation. I saw someone who had survived humiliation and learned from it. There's a difference between being quiet and being silenced. One is strength, the other is surrender. I was done surrendering. I picked up the phone and called Clark again. "I'd like to come by your office," I said. "When?" he asked. "Today." When I arrived, he was already waiting, glasses perched low on his nose, documents spread across his desk. He didn't waste time with small talk. "You've decided, haven't you?" "Yes," I said. "It's time." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "You're calm." "I've been angry before," I said. "It's never helped." He smiled. "That's when people make the smartest moves, when the fire stops burning and starts lighting the way." He handed me a set of forms. "We'll start with a notice of ownership confirmation and reversion filing. They'll receive it by mail and email simultaneously. After that, they'll have 30 days to vacate or appeal. But since there's been no payment, they can't appeal." I looked at the papers in my hand. 30 days, I repeated. The words felt like the sound of a door unlocking. Clark leaned back. "You sure about this?" "More than I've been about anything in a long time." I left the office and walked through the city, letting the noise wash over me. Cars honking, conversations blending, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement. I felt alive inside all of it, as if each sound reminded me that I still had agency, that life hadn't ended at that dinner table, it had only paused. I stopped at a small cafe and ordered soup. I hadn't eaten there in years, not since my wife was alive. The owner recognized me. "It's been a while," he said. "Yes," I answered softly. "Too long." As I ate, I thought about my daughter, not the woman who stayed silent, but the child who once ran into my arms after school, her backpack bouncing, her voice filling the air with stories. I wondered when she learned to hold her tongue. I wondered if love had taught her fear instead of courage. I didn't want to destroy her life. I wanted to free her from a lie. Because living in a house built on deception is its own kind of prison. When I left the cafe, the wind had picked up. A newspaper tumbled down the sidewalk, slapping against my leg. The headline was about markets and inflation, meaningless noise compared to the economy of respect, which was what I had been bankrupt in. By the time I got home, the decision felt heavier and yet somehow cleaner. I opened the folder once more and filled out the forms carefully. Each stroke of the pen was a heartbeat. Each signature was a reclamation of something I didn't even know I had lost. Then I sealed the envelope. When I placed it in the outgoing mail slot, I whispered, "For truth, not revenge." But even as I said it, I knew truth and revenge sometimes wear the same face, only their intentions differ. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the lights across the city. I thought of Patrick sitting at his dining table, probably boasting about his property, unaware that the walls around him were already slipping out of his grasp. I wasn't proud of the satisfaction that gave me, but I also wasn't ashamed. Pride is what built his downfall. Quiet satisfaction is what rebuilt my spine. A few days later, Clark called to confirm that the notice had been sent. "They'll receive it by tomorrow morning," he said. "Be prepared for a reaction." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I am." That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake thinking about my wife again. I imagined what she would say if she were here. She was always the gentler one, the voice of patience, but also the one who believed in dignity above all things. I could almost hear her whisper, "Justice isn't cruelty, love. It's balance, The next morning, my phone buzzed for the first time in weeks. I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. It was my daughter. Her message was short. "Dad, we got a letter. What's going on?" I stared at the screen, my heart thudding. Then another message appeared. "Patrick's furious. Please call me." I didn't. Not yet. Some truths need time to ripen before they can be understood. The following day, I received a call from Clark. His tone was neutral, professional. "They've acknowledged receipt," he said. "How did they react?" I asked. "Let's just say your son-in-law's vocabulary expanded considerably." I chuckled a dry, restrained laugh. "I can imagine." He paused. "And your daughter?" "Quiet," I said softly. "As always." He sighed. "This might get ugly." "I know, but sometimes the ugliness has to surface before peace can begin." When I hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking. I felt centered, grounded. The fear that had once lived in my chest had turned into clarity. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, not the expensive kind, just something decent. I sat on the balcony, listening to the hum of the city, and toasted the silence. The same silence that once felt like defeat now sounded like strategy. It's strange how life circles back. How the same quiet that broke you can later rebuild you when you finally learn how to use it. A week passed, then another. The messages from my daughter continued, first confusion, then pleading, then guilt. "Dad, can't we talk? Patrick says you can't do this. Please, I just want to understand." I didn't reply to the first three. Then, on the fourth message, I wrote only one line. "You'll understand soon." When I sent it, I felt something release inside me. The weight wasn't gone, but it had shifted from my heart to their doorstep. Around the third week, Clark called again. "Everything's moving smoothly. The legal reversion will finalize within days. After that, the property officially returns to you." I looked out the window and whispered home. But home now meant something else. It wasn't the walls or the roof or the yard. It was the sense of standing on ground that couldn't be taken from me anymore. I decided I wanted to see the house one last time before everything became official. Not as an intruder this time, but as a man saying goodbye to what had already served its purpose. I drove there on a cloudy afternoon. The air smelled of rain and asphalt. When I reached the street, I parked a few houses down again. The children were playing on the sidewalk, drawing chalk patterns that would wash away with the next storm. From where I sat, I could see my daughter watering the plants by the porch. She looked tired, older somehow, though only weeks had passed. She was talking on the phone, her voice low, strained. Then Patrick appeared behind her, taking the phone from her hand, his face red with anger. He gestured wildly, pointing toward the street, toward the mailbox, toward everything that was slipping through his fingers. I didn't stay long. I didn't want to turn my peace into pity. When I drove away, I felt no triumph, only inevitability. Like a storm cloud finally releasing the rain it's been holding for too long. That night, as I sat at home, I realized something. I had spent my whole life trying to protect my family from hardship. But in doing so, I had shielded them from growth. Maybe this was the only way for truth to breathe through discomfort, through exposure, through the sound of their own pride collapsing. And for the first time, I thanked God for the silence. Because without it, I never would have heard my own resolve echo back to me. The next morning, as I brewed my coffee, my phone buzzed again, a call this time, not a message. I answered. Her voice trembled. "Dad, please. He's losing it. He says he'll take you to court." "Let him try," I said calmly. "He's arguing with paper, not me." She began to cry softly. "I didn't know, Dad. I swear I didn't know you still owned it." "I know," I said gently. "But that's not the part that hurt me." "What was?" she asked. "Your silence." The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, small and shaky. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I didn't want him to turn on me." "I understand," I said. "But sometimes silence doesn't protect you. It only delays what's inevitable. Are you going to take the house?" "It's not about taking," I said. "It's about restoring what was never meant to be lost." She didn't reply, but her tears spoke for her. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the black screen of my phone. I thought of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every small act of love that had built her world. None of it was wasted. It had simply been misplaced for a while. Now it was finding its way back. That evening, I walked to the lake again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and violet. The surface of the water rippled like glass, breathing. I stood there for a long time, feeling the wind on my face. Something inside me whispered, "This is not revenge. This is return." I nodded to myself. Yes, return to dignity, return to balance, return to the truth that love without self-respect is not love at all. By the time I went home, the decision was complete. The man who had left his daughter's house was gone. The man who was walking home now was someone else, quieter, sharper, stronger. I was no longer the guest who overstayed. I was the builder who reclaimed what he had built. And the silence that once followed me like a shadow had become my ally, patient, deliberate, unstoppable. I woke before dawn the next morning. The sky was the color of cold metal, and the city was still half asleep. I brewed my coffee slowly, feeling the rhythm of my heartbeat steady in my chest. There was no anger, left only clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't shout, it hums. I sat by the window, watching the first bus pass, the headlights cutting through mist like two steady intentions. I thought about how life repeats lessons until we finally act on them. For years, I mistook patience for virtue. But patience without boundaries is just permission. I had been giving permission for far too long. The documents on the table waited like silent witnesses. My name on them looked different now, not like ink, but like a boundary drawn in faith. My wife used to say, "There's a time for grace and a time for ground." I finally understood what she meant. Grace without ground makes you a ghost in your own story. I wasn't going to haunt anyone's life anymore. I folded the papers neatly, slid them into a new folder, and wrote one word on the cover: closure. It didn't mean the end. It meant the beginning of a version of me that didn't have to earn respect that was already his by right. Outside, the world was waking. A neighbor walked his dog. The smell of rain touched the air. Somewhere, a church bell rang 7 slow times, each one echoing like a countdown. I whispered to myself, enough. That single word carried years of swallowed pride, decades of sacrifice, and the soft echo of every time I had stayed quiet when I should have spoken. Then I smiled. A small, honest smile, the kind that comes when you realize no one else needs to believe in your peace for it to exist. I stood, took one last look around the room, and grabbed my coat. The folder felt light under my arm. Not like revenge, but like restoration. As I stepped outside, the air greeted me with that early morning chill that always precedes something irreversible. I locked the door behind me and began to walk not away from something, but toward something. The street was empty. My footsteps sounded louder than usual, each one, sinking with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. Every man has a breaking point. Mine wasn't loud or violent. It didn't arrive with shouting or slam doors. It arrived in stillness, the kind that makes you finally hear yourself. By the time I reached the main road, the sun was rising. Light spilled over the horizon, soft and unhurried, as if heaven itself was agreeing with me. I whispered the same words my wife used to say before every hard day. Do what must be done, and do it without fear. And so I did. That morning, I stopped being the father who waited. I became the man who remembered what he owned, not just the house, but his dignity. And I promised myself one thing. From this point on, my silence would speak for me, and the world would finally learn to listen.